Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of DarshanTalks. We have Angela Wagner with us again today. And as we may remember, a couple of days ago, we did a initial stream with Angela talking about trust and how do you build trust in the life sciences. And we were specifically talking about building trust and why has there been a loss of trust between pharma and patients. And we had a very, very interactive session last time, and we had a lot of feedback. Angela happens to be working on her master's degree, on her master's thesis at the University of the Sciences, and this is the subject of her master's thesis. So, as far as we know, this is the first online crowdsourced precepting, if you will, of someone's master's thesis as well. So, feel free to jump in, feel free to advise. We're excited to have you on. So, Angela, where were we right now? The last time we spoke, where were we?
I believe we were just getting into the second concept or portion of the trust model that I had put together, or the model of trust. It's a trust model, I guess, is an IT term.
Sure.
Model of trust. And I believe we were discussing attunement. But actually, I did want to call out from our last video meeting. There was a commenter who mentioned something about full disclosure. And full disclosure, being, important for trust. And actually, the more I thought about it, well, yeah, absolutely, I agree that is true. But actually, the idea of full disclosure will come up in another portion of the model of trust. So I don't believe that it has to do specifically with benevolence. You maybe could argue that it is benevolent to fully disclose, but again, it has to be value added. It has to be something that would have no benefit to the company itself. And it seems like full disclosure could possibly fit into that, but it may not. So actually it comes up a little bit later. But I wanted to go ahead and address that because I felt like it was sort of left hanging.
Okay. It actually came in literally after we hung up. So
did it? Oh, okay.
Last possible.
Well, then it was definitely left hanging, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. So, Angela, do you want to show us? Well, quick 30-second recap. What have we talked about? What is beneficence? And going from there. Let's start from there.
All right. Well, the first part of the model that we discussed was benevolence, which actually, does feed into beneficence. But in this particular model, benevolence is the idea that the object of trust, which in this case would be the pharmaceutical company, is to act in a value-added way, in a way that shows altruism. So making an effort to do something that is at best neutral to the company in terms of a real immediate benefit. And at worst, it could be detrimental to the company, such as a company offering a physician finder on a branded website that could result, it won't result in an immediate financial benefit to the company, and it could result in the patient being prescribed a competitor's drug, which would be a loss for the company. So that is the example that I'm going to hang on to for benevolence.
Okay. So let's show your outline and start discussing what the next one would look like.
All righty. Let me share my screen here.
Yep. You want to share your screen?
And I want to share my application window. There we are. Is it large enough?
It is now large enough. Give me a second.
Okay.
Hold on. Okay. So attunement. Talk to us about what attunement is. One of those things
right.
Argued over a lot.
Okay, so attunement is kind of an odd term to use in the life sciences. From where I saw it used, actually, it was coming up in social science papers, so more of a psychology bent.
Okay.
And it includes the concept of awareness, response, and harmony. So you need kind of all three: awareness, response, harmony. It is a two-way construct. So ideally, you'd end up with a unity of purpose or an alignment of goals, sort of that you're negotiating, and you end up agreeing that this is the way we need to go. That is attunement, right? Two people or two entities who can sort of agree on what is happening. And actually, it can show benevolence. You could argue that, with the previous discussion from last week about the Girl Scouts, you could argue, well, the patient would really like it if we could support the Girl Scouts, so let's do that.
Right.
So that could be benevolence if there's no financial or other benefit to the company. But it's actually a distinct idea. And the benevolence is an intrinsic quality of the company that you can illustrate through an altruistic action. It does not require a response. It's still benevolence if the patient goes, I don't really care. Or if the patient goes, wow, I think I really need to do more business with this company. Perhaps I should think this company looks like they're doing a really nice thing. They may be more responsible. I should probably consider, this company or this company's product.
So here's the question that I have, and I think it's worth clarifying. Are you suggesting that you don't need both benevolence and attunement? You can do either or?
Well, I mean, the thing about this model of trust is that we're trying to examine what would cause a patient to form trust in a pharmaceutical company. So it could be either or. It does not have to be all of them. In practice, it may be, and that would actually be an interesting thing to study with actual, human subjects.
Yeah.
Which of these seems to matter the most? Do they all matter? Do none of them matter? I mean, it would be a really interesting thing to study. So, I mean, in theory, it could be that you're the sort of person who only cares about attunement, but you don't care about any of these other things. Although as we go through the rest of them, we may discover that that's unlikely. But it would be interesting to see if people make comments. What do people think? Do we need them all? Do we only need one? Do we need two or three? I mean, who knows? So yeah, they're not mutually exclusive.
Okay.
So anyway, benevolence is an intrinsic quality. It does not require a response. You can be benevolent if no patient goes to your website and looks up a doctor. You can be equally benevolent if every patient goes to the website and looks up a doctor.
Right.
It's really more about, look, I have made a gesture. It was made with possible harm to myself, but really no benefit that I can see. No direct benefit, aside, from potentially the benefit of being seen as being altruistic, which is to gather, or increase patient trust. So attunement is a result of a formal or informal two-way interaction.
Right.
It can be initiated by either party. It does not seem to matter. If it's successful, it'll be a non-zero-sum outcome. Everyone will be happy, right, in a perfect attunement situation. It actually does not address the notion of harm, except for where a lack of attunement can affect trust building. So,
but before you continue, one of the questions that I would ask, because we're working with the life sciences, is prove it. What is your evidence suggesting that attunement is even a factor?
Well, it looks like. I wonder why I didn't put this in here. I actually have later on some
citations.
Support for this. Yeah,
okay.
That it has to be two-way. And there were studies that showed that a two-way interaction, brought about more trust, and that but it didn't really address. It did address altruism versus not altruism, because benevolence comes up in pretty much every model. Attunement sometimes does. It's called different things by different people.
Okay.
So it's not as easy to see as, benevolence. Here is benevolence. This is how we think benevolence is happening. So attunement, it's sometimes called customer service, but it's customer service plus. Okay. So it shows up like in an e-commerce study. It will show up as being responsiveness, but it's not. It's responsiveness to the customer's particular need, not just general responsiveness. So it gets a little bit muddy here, but I'm going to forge ahead with it. And again, if people have comments, I would love to hear, because we'd love this to be the best presentation ever done on Give me a quick presentation. So let's discuss motivations. Why would you want to establish attunement?
Yeah.
And first of all, we have awareness. So we recognize that there could be benefits to the patient if we are aware of what the patient needs.
The we in this case is the pharma company.
We in this case would be the pharma company, yeah.
Got
so,
it.
And this comes up as sort of the idea of transparency.
Yeah.
I think. It's not a perfect correlation, but certainly if you want to have transparency, you recognize the patient would really like to have more information or would like to know what's going on. And patient benefits include convenience, economic gains, and this was really interesting because this study, they discovered that economic gains, as far as trust building, were more important than other considerations such as homogeneity. So, they thought, well, if we put people from the same economic group or the same cultural group in the same trust group for these between patient interactions, that they'll have more trust. And what they discovered was that the promise of an economic gain was more important. So if they took, they took people who are from different socioeconomic backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds, they put them in the same group, and they discovered that they actually had more trust in the other members if they were all going to be getting some kind of economic benefit.
Did that economic benefit have to be equal, or do you have to get more?
I believe in the study that it was the promise was they were all going to share equally.
Okay.
So I'm again, I haven't seen a study where they did the same sort of thing and discovered that if they gave people different amounts, that it would change the amount they would trust. It'd be an interesting concept because I think maybe it would. If you're feeling like you're going to get less than the group, you probably don't trust the group.
Right. Or what happens if you get more? Do you trust more than the rest of the group?
That would be a good point too.
The other question that I have from this is this why, say, a patient assistance program can be used to generate trust? Because, well, they're giving me drug for cheaper than it would have cost. Therefore, I should.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think that patient assistance would fall under attunement because both parties recognize the patient would like to spend less money.
Yeah.
The pharmaceutical company would like to distribute more product.
Yeah.
But you can't put it under benevolence because there is there is a direct economic gain for the company.
Yep.
So it's not altruism if you're getting paid.
Right.
So yeah, I would definitely say it falls much more under attunement. Definitely.
Okay.
So another reason for to gain trust through awareness is the possibility of a positive health outcome. And that that kind of makes sense, but to be able to find it in a study was interesting. And off the top of my head, I can't remember exactly what Jenkins was studying. I didn't have a chance to take a look at it this morning, but I will definitely do that before next time.
Okay.
Very, very interesting stuff overall. So the second facet of attunement is response. So if you recognize that the patient wants less expensive drugs and you don't respond, you don't have attunement, right? Attunement has broken down because there has been no response that suggests, anything. You cannot have attunement without a response. So providing opportunities for customer contribution will increase trust. That kind of, that makes perfect sense. Discovered, not surprisingly, patients believe that pharmaceutical companies don't listen to them. And this actually came from, it's an international company, I want to say possibly Sweden. I wish I could remember off the top of my head. But Drugs Disclosed, it's related to a company that does an online patient database, if you will. The patients will enter their information, like I took X drug for X number of days. These were the side effects that I had. So it's like a real world evidence site. And they're using it in Europe, and they're very excited about it. It's a very interesting program. And actually there's something somewhat similar here. It's called Patients Like Me. And they also will use the data for real world evidence studies.
Yeah.
But very interesting thing. So, Drugs Disclosed, I believe it's called Drugstars, the company. And they've done a few different studies and published it, and it was very interesting. So patients believe they're not being listened to, and actually they want to communicate with pharma companies about the drugs that they take. And again, that is not surprising, but it is part of the response. This is what the patient wants. Let's give them a response or allow them to respond. So not surprisingly, a high level of responsiveness to questions, concerns, and comments is associated with higher levels of customer, or in this case, patient trust. Again, not terribly surprising.
The issue with that is, how do you actually address the issue of patients wanting to engage and pharma being told by FDA that you can't?
That's true. There are only certain ways that you can engage, but you can do something, and probably the use of these between patient forums and websites that are aggregating this real world data are a good step forward. It's something that can be done, and that patients seem to respond to it. But again, it kind of depends on how onerous is this for the patient to do. I actually tried one of these sites. I went out and created an account to see what would happen. And honestly, I think if I had nothing else going on all day, maybe I would do this, but I'm not going to log in every day and tell you what I take it for, how I'm feeling. Or maybe I'm just not the target patient. Maybe they're looking for other people. People who do have time, or they have a condition that they feel like they really need to log every day how it's going. So, maybe that was the problem. But all right, moving on. Did you have a question, Darshan?
No, not yet.
Okay, not yet. Oh boy. All right, so moving on, the third part of attunement is harmony. And, I've used here predictability of interaction, which I think is pretty decent.
I have a question, actually, before you get into this. There was a question that I was trying to formulate in my head. That's why I said not yet. One of the big topics that I deal with is the issue of clinical trial transparency, and to talk about how providing data in a lay summary format would be helpful, not just for the purposes of transparency, but because it should hopefully help patients understand where the information is coming from, why the drug is approved. Is that part of that response process? And if so, what are some tips that you'd give to optimize transparency?
It certainly could be. Later on in the model, we'll discuss other facets of trust that may also be applicable. One of them, I'm not going to give too much of a spoiler, if you will, but it has to do with providing complete information in a way that is understandable. Okay, so let's talk about it then. Oh, we could, but we could go into it for response as well. I mean, it again, not mutually exclusive, so it could also be. But, in terms of just responsiveness, I mean, studies have shown that it's possible to be too responsive, actually. Okay. But in terms of transparency, other studies that I have looked at that weren't necessarily included here, because I've been very interested in the idea of transparency. I was watching and doing some promo work having to do with the Medicare STAR system, where patients were expected to give ratings to their doctors, and that really struck me because traditionally people were not comfortable necessarily rating their doctors, looking at their doctors as being like any other any other transaction. Like I went to the store and this is how I rated my service at the store. Well, I went to the doctor and this is how I rated my service at the doctor. That there may be a generational difference there, where I'm seeing more with the older people are having generally a little more trouble with this. But before I get too far afield there, what I found is that the idea of partnering with patients is very uncomfortable for some of them. So I think the idea of transparency, the idea of giving more information to patients in terms of response, is kind of about knowing what the patient is able to handle, which I think may vary with various factors, or what the patient believes is important, which also varies. So it's kind of an individualized thing. So I don't know if there's like a specific tip other than, it is possible to be overly responsive. And that did surprise me. But again, in the outline here, I'm talking about providing opportunities for customer contribution. So, perhaps the answer to, transparency is to let the patient feel more involved in some way.
Okay.
With the creation of something in the interaction. But it's a very interesting topic. We could kind of go on for hours about it, I think.
By the way, Angela Stoyanovich seems to appreciate the conversation. So,
oh, yay.
Thank you, Angela. But yeah, so you want to continue your harmony?
Yeah, let's continue to harmony. So greater predictability of the interaction increases trust, and that is suggestive of harmony. And I could go into a little bit more detail. Weiss did just an incredible study. It was a study in Europe, and they actually created an app and recorded, people would record their everyday conversations in the app and answer just a lot of questions about it. So in the end, it was actually like a trust network. It was just incredible. But one of the things that was discovered was that, predictability, lack of conflict would increase trust. And I think that has a lot to do with harmony, predictability, less conflict. And actually that is the second point too. A low degree of conflict suggests an aligned goal. High degree of conflict suggests a misaligned goal. I mean, that is kind of the nature of conflict. We don't agree. We're not in harmony. So when there's a low,
who's the conflict between?
Well, in the case of, Weiss's study, it was a conflict between anybody. So it could be a conflict between you and a relative. It could be a conflict between you and a company. It wasn't necessarily just interpersonal. So in this case, the conflict would be, between the patient and the pharmaceutical company.
Got it.
An excellent example is, I am the patient and I believe the pharmaceutical company is overcharging me for my drug.
Okay.
And they're pocketing the money, and I don't know what they're doing with it, but they're certainly not helping me.
Right.
Right. So that would be a conflict, because the pharmaceutical company, would not necessarily be like, yeah, we just want your money. Right. I mean, there are bad actors. Of course, there are bad actors. But for the most part, the whole point of having a pharmaceutical company is not, we just want to take your money. And, it sometimes is simply a matter of explaining the goals and realigning so that everyone agrees that there's no conflict, right? I'm not fighting against the pharmaceutical company to get my prescription. That is not, definitely not harmony. So, if you can lower the conflict, get everyone to see that there is harmony, it's much more likely that there will be trust.
Okay. So is that all attunement, or is integrity part of attunement?
No, it's actually all attunement, and we will see later, well, it's down at the bottom of the screen, I think, that integrity is a separate construct altogether. Do we want to get into it today, or do we want to save it?
Let's save that as a separate conversation.
Okay.
Any last comments or discussions before we hang up?
Well, I'm trying to think here. I think I'm good. I'll be interested to see if there are comments that can, maybe elucidate this a little bit better. This is one that I actually, I believe I actually combined parts of a couple of different original constructs, because I felt like there was some overlapping. So it would be interesting to see, do people agree with this? Does this make sense?
Right.
In terms of patient and pharma, and, all constructive comments are welcome.
Well, I'm sure we'll get some more. And if they want to reach you, how do they reach you, Angela?
How do they reach me? That is a good question. Well, I mean, they could reach me at my my Use Sciences email. That might be a good way to go.
Okay.
It's awagner@mail.usciences.edu.
Awesome.
And yeah, I would love to hear from you.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening in.
Thanks, Darshan.
Thank you.